Mr. Hanlon.
Moderator, be traded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to borrow $30,000, and that requires a two-thirds vote. On the main motion under item F, Article 13, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed? All right, we'll have to take a counted vote. All those in favor, please raise your right hand, and would my hard-working tellers please go to work. Mr. Reitmeyer.
14.
14. Mr. Mosseri. 21. Mr. Jones. 33. All those opposed, please raise your right hand. Mr. Reitmeyer.
8.
8. Mr. Mosseri. 35. Mr. Jones.
16.
16. The vote is 68 in favor, 59 opposed. The motion fails to achieve the required two-thirds majority. The motion is lost. Mr. Smith.
Mr. Moderator, I move to appropriate the sum of $70,000 for the purpose of purchasing a material screen-all for use by the Department of Public Works, and that to meet this appropriation, the Treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow said sum.
You've heard the motion for $70,000 for the purpose of item G. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation? Mr. Jones, Sr.
Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee recommends. The DPW has estimated that the payback on this is approximately 4.5 years. So it seems to me that's a good investment.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation? Mr. Smith.
Board of Selectmen recommend.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Smith does not wish to be heard. But maybe Mr. O'Brien wishes to be heard.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Hanlon, a question to you, please. I know you're capable of answering. Specifically, has somebody done any research as to using one piece of equipment for a regional use, specifically maybe Middleton, Linfield, North Reading? Has that been investigated? It doesn't seem to be a piece of equipment that's utilized constantly.
It would be not utilized daily, but it would certainly be utilized seasonally, especially during the construction season. What is the impetus for this request? This has been a discussion departmentally for a few years, and Reading has one, and we have asked to use it in our fit. We can't get it because they're just tied up with it, and we hesitated bringing it to town meeting to such point in time that there were three major issues that we're dealing with. Number one is the space. A couple years ago, the DPW facility was operating as the garage and the fleet and operations, and now all of a sudden it's the hottest place in town. And space is limited. So one of the areas of concern is the space and all the material storage that we need to still provide for. The second is the increased need for the products during construction and the highway construction, the parks, and the cemetery expansion program. Just Loam alone, not Home Alone, excuse me, folks. Loam alone over 2 years, when you consider the cemetery expansion needs, the park needs, and the highway needs for loam and seed in conjunction with rebuilding the streets, we're looking at $58,000 just in 2 years, just for that alone. So the payback easily is 3 to 4 years out for this, just in dealing with loam. The second issue is it's a combination recycling and also a solid waste issue with the Department of Environmental Management Protection in the solid waste. For example, our asphalt that we bring back to the garage area, to the floor and back, that's somewhere between a contaminated and hazardous material. They're kind of in between that definition. Now, once we grind that in conjunction with gravel, it ceases to be an issue. It's gravel. Likewise, we have the same issue with catch basin sweepings, that they're contaminated, and DEP says they're contaminated, but if we're allowed to use that in connection with street sweepings and compost to make loam, then it's loam. Bear with me. So it's a time element and kind of where we are, our products that we're recycling, if you will, and we don't have to go out and direct purchase virgin materials. We can utilize as much of the materials we're bringing in from excavations and composting and so forth, reutilizing it, and then putting it out as product.
Very good answer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, this is one of the items that we kind of drilled Mr. Hanlon on for quite a while when he came in with this request. But it's a very versatile piece of equipment. For you that don't know what a screen all is, it's a piece of equipment that screens all types of gravels, rock, and separates the big rock from the small rock, the sand from the stone, and disperses it in different increments. And there's different size screens that go on these particular pieces of apparatus. But in addition to what Mr. Hanlon said, there's a lot of times when there are construction sites going on in the community, and the materials that come out of those construction sites are just passed on to some contractor someplace, as opposed to being able to take this gravel and all these materials back to the town shed. If they in fact have this piece of equipment on board and at the town shed, when these construction sites are going on, and for instance, when the Route 62 project gets started, there'll be a lot of materials that would be just dispersed someplace rather than the local garage. And to have this piece of equipment on board could certainly enhance the potential for the town developing gravels and materials that can be used on some of our unaccepted streets where we have gravel roads and things such as that. But it really is a piece of equipment. It's an expensive piece of equipment on the one hand, but it'll be well used on the other. So I think it's a very valuable piece of equipment, and I think we should support this request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any further discussion? Hearing none. This is a motion to borrow $70,000, requires a two-thirds vote. On the motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All those in favor, please raise your right hand, and would my tellers please go to work? Sorry. Got to do it the right way. It doesn't take that long. Mr. Reitmeyer?
24.
24. Mr. Jones? 55. Mr. Masseri? 59. All those opposed, please raise your right hand. Mr. Reitmeyer?
0.
0. Mr. Masseri? 2. Mr. Jones? 0. The vote is 138 in favor, 2 opposed. The motion is carried. Mr. Smith?
Mr. Moderator, I move to appropriate and transfer from free cash the sum of $25,000 for the purpose of improving the drainage at Parkview Terrace.
Heard the motion. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation, Mr. Jones Senior?
Finance Committee recommends, Mr. Moderator.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation, Mr. Smith?
Board of Selectmen recommend.
Is there any further discussion? Mrs. Jenkins?
Yes, I have a question on whether or not you feel that this drainage will be lasting more than 5 years. And as we have been explained from the Finance Committee in the past, anything that will last over 5 years can be bonded. And I'm wondering why we're using free cash for this item.
Mr. Hanlon, does it last longer than 5 years? That's, I think, a question that you could answer for the lady.
Yes, it is, Diana. This is our drainage improvements are usually in conjunction with our road improvements projects, but this is an isolated area in the Martins Pond vicinity, and it's locked. It's all locked, and the backyards drain downhill, and there's no way for the water to get out. Over the years, when we get flash flooding, we literally sit there with a pickup truck and a pump and pump it up over the hill into the pond. The town engineer, Mike Sorrigan, has been able to mitigate a way through gravity to actually build this system so it would be permanent and forever, for as long as forever would be.
So I'm not questioning the need, I'm questioning the funding source. If
That was
someone
the
from
second
the
part of your
Finance
question,
Committee could
Mrs.
recommend...
Jenkins, if you'll just be patient for a second. I was going to ask the Finance Committee if they could shed some light on the rationale for the funding. Mr. Jones?
First off, anything that you bond costs more than paying cash. We are past our bonding guidelines right now. For example, if you looked in your warrant this year versus last year you would have seen a set aside of $425,000 to meet town debt service. We have increased that to $500,000 this year, plus we are going to be recommending a transfer from stabilization of just under $200,000. So our normal cash flow year to year is not meeting the bonding obligations that we have taken on. This is not debt exclusion. These are the normal bondings that we've done for all town departments. Having said that, when we have the free cash available, we feel it's a better use of the dollar rather than paying the interest on it over a minimum of 5 years, which is the shortest term you can bond something, 10 or 15 or whatever the term is.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Mrs. Jenkins.
We just passed over defeated purchasing equipment of a command vehicle for $36,000, which was bonded, recommended by the FinCom. Replace and equip a 3/4-ton pickup truck, $30,000, which was bonded. That would be $61,000. I'm not doing my math too good, am I? $66,000, and I feel that I would like to make a motion to change the funding source of Article 13, letter H, Parkview Terrace drainage from $25,000 free cash to bonding.
We'll have to have that in writing, Mrs. Jenkins. Okay, the motion by Diana Jenkins is to change the funding source for Article 13, item H, Parkview Terrace drainage, from $25,000 free cash to bonding. On the motion to amend, this requires a simple majority. Mr. Smith. A point of order. Mr. Mosseri, state your point of order. No, the warrant is, article is very general, Mr. Mosseri. It just says to see if the town will vote to raise by taxation and appropriate and transfer from unexpended funds remaining in warrant articles of previous years, or appropriate by transfer from available funds, or borrow a sum of money for the purchase of items of a capital nature, and further to authorize the town